Hello, everyone. My name is Sam Ewan from CoinDesk. I'm really excited for the conversation we're about to have. This is a conversation on the Metaverse, connecting 1 billion users to the open Metaverse, digital identities, user experience, and new business. Really excited to have this conversation today. First, I'm going to introduce all of our panelists. So the first is Benjamin Sharbit, co-founder and CEO of Darewise. Second up, we have Brian Chan, who's the VP of Operations and Projects at Animoca Brands. Then we have Kelvin Ting, Head of Product at Hex Trust, and Tommy Wong, Marketing Director at Gryfyn. I do want to give a shout out to Hex Trust, who is our sponsor of this panel, which is a institutional grade digital asset management platform. Please check them out at hextrust.com. So I'm just going to kick this off with a kind of interesting query. Before this panel, I went and I Googled, what is the Metaverse? And there were 133 million results. I'm assuming most of those are incorrect. So what I thought would be interesting is if we had each of you give us your kind of TLDR of what the Metaverse is. Why don't you start with Brian?
Yeah, sure. I guess, I mean, the way we think about it is that the Metaverse is really a collection of digital nations, right? Where there's ultimate interoperability and also a place where people actually have true digital property rights, right? And I think, I don't necessarily think of the Metaverse as a destination per se, but I think it's rather something that, eventually, just like the internet, integrates seamlessly into our lives, right? In the coming future.
Fantastic. Kelvin, why don't you go next?
Yep, sure. Yeah, I think those are really great thoughts from Brian, and I'd just like to add on mine as well. I mean, I think it's really a virtual extension of the world in which we live in, because you see, when you're thinking about the Metaverse itself and what encompasses it, it's really a collection of multiple economies in which you can prove your ownership, because essentially what you can do is you can show that you've got land, and the blockchain actually proves that. You can have any items which are skins upon your avatar, and you can interact with other people's avatars, right? So essentially it is a way for yourself to prove your identity, or at least to showcase your identity in a parallel fashion to the physical world in which we live in.
Amazing. Tommy, what about you?
Well, I think to add on to that, I think those are great points in terms of identity. I think from the experience side as well, I think the Metaverse is a whole world of experiences that users now have the choice to access on their own kind of domain through technologies like NFTs. So I think from experience side as well, I think it's a very rich world.
All right, and Ben, why don't you wrap it up? What is the Metaverse?
Yeah. I'm very lucky to be surrounded with such bright minds today. So obviously it's most of it has been said. I can emphasize first on this collection of destinations. I think this is really important, and of course there are a few here advocating for the open Metaverse, and hardly and very dramatically living in this. So I think this is the first important that I always emphasize on when I introduce this concept to people. The second thing is this idea of extension of your physical life. So you kind of adding an extra layer that can potentially enrich your existence today, because this is a place where you can meaningfully exist through social experience, entertainment, education, of course, earning a revenue. So it's very different from just a massively multiplayer game, like people sometimes like to just summarize it. It's about something that truly meaningfully impacts your life, and that is connected with other experiences.
So I just want to pull on that for a second. The way that Wikipedia defines it, it says that the Metaverse is a network of 3D virtual worlds, which is focused on social connection. And I think, Benjamin, you hit the social piece of it. So I guess just following up on that, do you guys feel that gameplay and experience is paramount to social, or is the social connection the thing that is sort of lived through in the gaming side, in the experience side? Maybe Tommy, we'll start with you on that.
I think those are real. That's a really interesting philosophical question, but I think that's why we're all here today to kind of build the infrastructure to be able to explore that. I think if we look at where we are right now, the content is just yet to come. I think a lot of it, there's been a lot of experimentations. We have actually had a time where everyone's talking about building, right? So the upcoming where projects are really building on the content, building on the experience. And I think that will really help us to tackle this question. Is it the social element that's more important, or is it the gaming element or the entertainment element? But, we ponder this every day in every project that we go into.
And Brian, let's, just want to get your thoughts. Animoca is so involved in so many different projects. Do you think, like, are you guys coming in because you think this is the new social internet, or are you coming in because this is, the new Xbox?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more than that, right? I think, just adding on to what Tommy said, I think, whether it's, the gaming aspect or kind of the social element, I think that really depends on what phase of development we are in. I think games is a very natural entry point because, of the 3.4 billion gamers that are really, spend the majority of their time in the digital world, right? So, having the metaverse, develop out of that first, I think makes a lot of sense, right? I think to us at Animoca Brands, it's less so about whether it's gaming or social, but really more around what Benjamin alluded to earlier, which is, whether it's an open or closed metaverse, right? Obviously at Animoca Brands, we distinguish between the two, and we are, heavy advocates of the open metaverse. And the fundamental principle of the open metaverse is where, people actually have digital property rights, right? Where the data that, that exists in the digital world are really the property of the people who are the very creators of such data, right? So I think to us, that is where, we think the fundamental principle that underpins the metaverse lies for us. And whether that manifests itself in the form of games or social elements, I think, that really just depends.
And so, Benjamin, let me go to you for a second, because it sounds like what Brian's saying, which I love, is like the gameplay is almost the gateway, right? It's what gets you in, but then are you like sort of staying for the social camaraderie that you then make? Where are you with that?
Yeah, I think that's the key point here. And the reason why so many are complaining, that it hasn't picked up yet. It hasn't been picked up yet by a massive audience. It's just because I'm not a firm believer that the social part is the entry point and is the gateway. I think Fortnite is a great playbook to look at, where Fortnite really introduced all of these entertainment but non-gameplay experiences once it already had tens of millions of players. So we know now it's no need to prove it anymore that gamification is a great mechanic to engage an audience and retain it. So the focus, and Animoca I think is putting a great focus on that, through the series of investment and acquisitions to let's build a really good project, really good game products that will, get people to come, to stick, to engage, and of course, eventually enjoy the benefits of blockchain, Web3, and decentralization. But gaming is the way to kind of streamline this before we move to something that is a bit more, maybe even a bit more aspirational, but that can't be the first thing that you front load.
Right. And Kelvin, I think looking at it through the lens of what you guys do, it feels like, but I remember being young playing games and sort of, losing my status and how far I'd gotten, right? Like, so when we talk about an open metaverse, I'm sure part of that is also ensuring that, kind of that we are not getting phished, we're not getting scammed, we're not losing our opportunities. So do you think, just from the sort of Hex Trust lens, that the success of gaming, but also frankly of the social connection, I can imagine what would happen there. And similarly, if you're part of a community and then suddenly you lose your assets, how do you guys look at sort of social gaming and then the need for security around that?
Yeah, for sure. I think we can pretty much like break this up into a couple of different points. Now, I think, but before that, I guess maybe it might be helpful for me to give an introduction as to what Hex Trust does and how we would be able to assist in this. So essentially, Hex Trust is a custodian. And what that means is that we are securing your digital assets on your behalf, right? So we've partnered with Animoca Brands and to create a product called Gryfyn, and both of which have representatives on this call, Tommy and Brian, right? And essentially the end goal is for us to create an experience for people to get into NFTs and to get into the metaverse without the need to, essentially learn all the basics and worry about having to manage your own keys, right? Why this is important is because essentially when we look at the market as it is today, we have a lot of people who are not crypto natives, and getting into the metaverse certainly requires a certain amount of knowledge and self-learning. I know a lot of people who've said that they've gotten into NFTs, but along the way they've gotten scammed or like they've gotten their keys lost, right, through some man-in-the-middle attack, right? So essentially there are a lot of risks that are associated with it, and we're trying to secure that. And the way we're doing it is that we're abstracting away the process of having to deal with your own private key phrase, for example, right? So essentially, if you were to open up MetaMask, which is one of the most popular crypto wallets in there, the default option would be for you to be able to store your own private keys. And this this 16 word phrase is essentially something that holds control over your identity, which you use to access the metaverse. It can be a little bit scary when you think about it, seeing as if you were to get into a project really early on and then your keys were lost, you basically risk losing millions of dollars. And this is something that we're trying to help with, right? So a lot of people don't have the knowledge to be able to store this, or maybe it's just too tedious of a process. So what Gryfyn is essentially something that helps us on both sides of the spectrum. So the first part is accessing the metaverse, similarly to how we can use existing wallets to connect into decentralized applications, to buy NFTs, right, to play games. And on the other side of the picture, we've got all the nitty-gritty details, regarding your security. So Hex Trust essentially employs a custodial service on behalf of the users. So what this means is that we store your private keys on your behalf, keep them safe, and then you don't even have to worry about interacting with these games and losing your private keys, and you can just focus on your digital experience.
Amazing. Thank you, by the way. That I did not know as much as that, so I'm glad to get that context. When we were having our pre-call, we talked about, is the metaverse where we want it to be today versus where it's going to be? And I think Benjamin, you had this phrase, which I have been happily throwing around now, about the idea of promise market fit versus product market fit. And so, one, I would love for you to explain that a little bit more. And I think we just then having a discussion on the metaverse today versus how are we getting to the hundreds of billions of users, or hundreds of millions of
hundreds
users.
of billions would be
right.
in the future for sure.
It's early here in New York.
Yeah. So the first thing that I can say about this promise market fit, when you're in the Web2 world, and especially talking to venture capitalists all the time, everybody's obsessed with promises, with the product market fit, and how you measure it. Nobody really knows how to measure, but people like to say that when you have it, you know it. And so if you're still wondering if you do, then it means you don't. So that's, how's my product really found an audience, and now we can scale. And that's a very important step in the development of a startup. For the metaverse today, and on the current offer, it's hard to claim that any of them has really found the product market fit, but they have definitely found what I like to call the promise market fit, right? So Web3 is very much about prospective things to happen, and that's also the way the whole business model is running. The whole of course, it was a lot of FOMO and speculation, but it's still today also a way to basically reward your early adopters and those who believe in it by saying you can participate to the network effect by owning an asset. And now we're all incentivized together to contribute to the development of that experience and the value of its assets. And of course, if people jump in now, it's because they like the promise, whether it's people buying NFTs, by people buying token and holding onto it, but also all the brands, for instance, in Sandbox, all these brands closing partnerships and really collaborating with Sandbox. So yes, maybe from a user standpoint, it's not yet accomplished, and that's the reason why it's hard to say that we have definitely found, that these companies have found a product market fit. But the promise is here. People are really excited. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it all the time. Because you remember what I said? There's no real way to measure it, but one way to measure it is that basically, if you know you have it, or if you have it, you know it. I think on the promise market fit, like project like Sandbox, they can't doubt that they don't have it. They absolutely have it. So many companies, so many content creators have been willing to join or have joined. Now we still, of course, have a long way to go to build. And so, just quickly, when your question about going to the billions of players, billions of users, it's a combination of things. First, of course, we need to streamline the whole experience. Right now it's extremely painful, and I'm sure that with with wallets like Gryfyn, finally it's going to be a much more pleasant experience. Even when you have a bit of experience in the space, it's still a pretty scary one. You can get tricked. So I understand the distance that most people want to take from it. And the second thing is we're still lacking in the product. So we don't really have the product market fit because the products are not there yet. So we can't have users until we have players, until we have products. So before being able to get to this level of scale, we need to build this product. And I think they're coming, I see a lot of great stuff coming, but these high quality experiences, they take time. We don't build them in 6 months.
No, that's a great way to think about it. So, and Brian, I want to talk to you, and then I want to talk about the tooling for a second. But Brian, so when you think of, you guys again have supported our building, are working with so many different projects here. What do you what's your time horizon? What are you thinking about when we first start seeing that next wave? We've as I think Benjamin mentioned, we've seen some really great beginnings, right? And Sandbox is a great example. But what is that? Are you guys thinking it's in 6-month increments? How do you think about all those next triggers for things that just get more and more people excited time-wise?
Yeah, I think in terms of timeline, right? I think just bear in mind that we're still in extremely early stages of the whole metaverse, right? I think if I recall correctly, I think the industry is expected to grow to 800 billion by 2024. But if you think of that, relative to the market cap of Facebook at its peak, right, 900 billion, it's still relatively small, right? So I would say in the grand scheme of things, yes, there's a lot of experimentations that have been happening, whether it be, hosting concerts in Fortnite, having virtual homes, virtual offices where people work remotely. I think these are all really good experimentations, but I think, all in all, we're still in, very, very early stages, right? And if you ask me, oh, okay, so what is the timeline? Probably I would say in the next 6 to 12 months, we should see an interesting next wave of development, right? Also under the backdrop of, keep in mind that this year, 2022, has been exceptionally difficult for the whole space, in general, right? With, Terra Luna, with, 3AC and then FTX. So I think, and the really positive thing about it is that, despite all the storm that we have been through, there's still a whole bunch of people that are in this industry and building, right? So I myself came to Taiwan just a couple of days ago, to participate, in a series of blockchain events, and you actually can see that the energy is still there, right? And I think when the storm settles, right now people are really focused on building, right? There's less of a market hype and kind of a FOMO, so people are really focused on really building value, building utility. I do expect to see a next wave of development that would happen let's say in the next 6 to 12 months, right? And then obviously that is caveated with a whole bunch of, I think, challenges or barriers to wide adoption that we would have to address as an industry, which I'm sure, we can talk about that a little bit later as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Tommy, going to you, and then I want to wrap this part up with Kelvin, but you guys are working on the toolkit, right? Like you're working on sort of the access points and how do we kind of make those things easier for folks. Do you think that is that an education play or is that a UX play when it comes to how do we get more people into this ecosystem?
That's a fascinating question. I think those are both equally important. I think what's beautiful about the metaverse space is that it's a place where everyone's building at the same time at all the different parts of the spectrum, from infrastructure to the economies, to the content, and then even to the offline extension. But for Gryfyn, what we've kind of seen from our experience with our kind of, our lens within Animoca Brands, as well as one of the companies, that we see there's a real big need at the entry point to really help us be more inclusive to the people that are interested, or the people that are curious, or the people that simply went to a great brand experience and wanted to jump into Web3. And I think over there, that especially that consumer facing wallet experience, like really making NFT experience enjoyable, I think that's really an area that will help us to build that foundation to get people in. But of course, it's relying on all the other partners at all the different types of layers to help to create this space together.
Yep. So Kelvin, I'm going to start with you. Following up on that, what do you think are the biggest blockers right now to mass adoption? Again, is it a user level issue, or is it a gameplay issue, or is it a social issue? Where do you think the things are in the way are?
Yeah, I think I'll go back to one of the previous points that has been mentioned on this one. So essentially, I think it's a lack of the availability of products which can easily on-ramp people onto the ecosystem. So essentially, I mean, we've been talking about wallets which don't have like really good user experiences. So for example, if you were to open up a traditional wallet today, there are quite a lot of struggles that you would see in terms of the user interface, right? So essentially, if you have a lot of NFTs, you basically need to scroll down and search for them. So imagine if you are an avid NFT collector, I'll need to go into my wallet. I'll need to look into like 1,000 of my NFTs. And sometimes, if your wallet is popular, people might actually spam you with even more NFTs, which are totally irrelevant, right? So, it can be really, really painful. And I guess even now with the rise of ERC-1155 tokens, which are fungible, I mean, the possibilities are just endless, right? So essentially, it would be very helpful, to have like products which actually tailor to giving you a good user experience. You could have filters and labels, you could have an order of precedence, right? You could even do things like having categorizations for different NFTs, and then after that, do some NFT discoveries. When you look at the bigger picture, right? I think the current state is that, a lot of the wallets are in their infantile positions, and because of this, it actually becomes a little bit harder for the games to start integrating. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. So if the wallets aren't good enough, right, and you're building for that wallet, then the game can't really innovate in that sense as well. So essentially, I think it's really about learning from what happened in the first generation of all the products that we're seeing, and then we start to move forward and push towards new frontiers by introducing all these more user-friendly features, by growing and then by learning together as a community.
Do you, and I'm gonna, maybe we'll go back to Benjamin on this one. So, I mean, I think that kind of user adoption is so key, and having that tool set that makes them feel safe and secure is essential, right? Are our expectations too high right now? Is, I guess, the question I want to ask. And I say that because we all kind of have watched Ready Player One, and we've seen kind of the movies that imagine this fully immersive, photorealistic environment where we're all going to be spending most of our time, and then we log on and it's not that, which is fine. It doesn't need to be that right now, right? But is the barrier, is it bandwidth? Is it our GPU speeds in our laptops? I think or is it just human expectation, right? I remember playing, Asteroids and Breakout when video games first came out, and I was entertained for hours and hours and days, right? So we didn't need that graphic rich experience. Have we overpromised ourselves? Or is it just about like making fun and social experiences people will gravitate? Ben, what do you think of that?
So if you picked Ready Player One, which is obviously a very common reference, but Ready Player One is a combination of many things. It's a virtual world. It has a lot of IPs, a lot of different roles, gameplay, quests. So what is it? It's a social platform. It's a gaming platform. It's so many things. Let's not even mention blockchain right now. Okay, let's put aside this technological component, which we shouldn't care so much about. So what we have right now out there that is offering an experience like this one, none, like nothing. And I think we just need to accept this fact. This is a little bit the problem. Is like people are getting super excited about the promise, and so a lot of entrepreneurs, like I said, Darewise with Life Beyond, the guys of Sandbox, Decentraland, Phantom Galaxies, like so many projects, very cool projects. We need the time to build them. As you might know, I come from the AAA game industry. I was one of the directors of Assassin's Creed. Realistically, games like that take like 5 years, and they're not a brand new IP with brand new systems. So think about now, we're saying we want to create something that is new. There's no copycat possible. There's no template, there's no framework that we can apply. So I think it's just, it's okay, that we're not ready. It takes time, and we're building. The market is kind of pushing us to do that anyway. There's no low-hanging fruits and short-term wins right now. So it's a good time to focus on that. And I think this is just what the Web3 community that has been there before, has been in this crypto world, and is not used to seeing things taking this long, because building smart contracts and these projects were fairly quick. But the truth is, this type of experiences that they dream of, and that we all dream of, that will absolutely happen. It just take more, and we count this in years.
And I think.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to add to what Benjamin was saying. I think people, especially in Web3, they tend to lose the sense of time, right? And we're pretty impatient within this industry, right? Obviously, they always say, right, 1 day in Web3 is like a year in Web2. And so I think it's not really about, yes, I think Ready Player One was a very visionary kind of a thought process, right? But I do think that, again, going back to my earlier points on how early we are in this industry, right? We've only been around for, since 2014, 7-8 years. If you think about, when the internet first came about in the 1990s, right? I still remember, we had to have like a physical cable under the ocean and whatnot. And then we moved to 3G, 4G, 5G cloud and everything. And that took a span of 30 years to get there, right? So I think it just goes back to my earlier point. I think we're still very early. Yes, the metaverse as we see it today, there is still quite a significant disparity between that and Ready Player One. But I think, I do feel a little bit more positive that eventually we will get there, right?
And I would like to add around the IP side as well, because you mentioned IP, Benjamin. I think that's very interesting because IP comes from brands. And one of the reasons kind of why Gryfyn exists as well is that we're not just looking at the consumer side, we also want to look at the toolkit side and really help different brands to kind of bring their experiences to help to enrich our Web3 environment. The platform's there, everyone's building, but we need more help. We need brands that come in that, have their audiences. They're teaching us how to communicate, but we can also teach them with our tools on how to engage more. So I think it is why we're all here. The promise is very, very big, and everyone can see it, and everyone has that example, either it's Ready Player One or something else. But that all kind of merges into this world that we're trying to morph together right now, and I think that's why it's very exciting right now.
I like a lot what Tommy is talking about, because it's also there are so many interesting items here. The first thing is the brand, like, signing partnerships with brands is way faster than building the experiences. So of course, all this has been front loaded, and people are like, so what? We have all these deals, all these brands being present. So what's happening now? Well, again, these things take time. The second thing is you're talking about collaborating in this development. And first, it's obviously a necessity, because when you're a fashion designer, well, your skill is not to build 3D world and 3D experiences. It's a different skill set, obviously. And maybe so far they kind of rushed into entering in the world and the space, and now they're like, okay, we need to build it, and there isn't that many builders out there, so we need to expand this community. And the third point is it kind of really goes back to the ethos of Web3, which is community and collaboration, and that is great. So what we're basically saying is that now, to be successful, to really create this new type of experience, we need to collaborate. Perfect. This is exactly the core DNA of Web3. It's to collaborate. We at Darewise right now, we see an insane dynamic. We just announced a fantastic partnership with Swear London, the shoe company. We have many more coming, and we're not talking to Web2 people. We're talking to people within these companies that have completely embraced the Web3 ethos. They want to collaborate. They're not here for the short-term revenue. They're here to build because they believe in this new kind of world and new value proposition that we're all collectively building. So a little bit of patience, but also putting the energy in the right direction right now, which is to create and collaboratively.
And I think, if this truly is the next iteration of the internet, which I think a lot of us believe this will be, the internet as well, to Tommy's point, was built with brands coming in. Like AT&T was the first banner ad on the internet in 1994, right? But now look at where we've gone in what is still a relatively short amount of time, to the fact where so much of where the internet is supported by how forward-thinking brands combined with forward-thinking platforms like yourselves are sort of reimagining the future. I want to switch our focus a little bit to digital identity. And Kelvin, I want to start with you on this, because we actually had a great question that came in, which was, how integral are tokens to the metaverse experience, right? When you think of ownership rights and tradability and all that, but like, what if I don't own a Bored Ape, but I want to play a Bored Ape, right? How are you guys thinking about, maybe we can go from you to Tommy, but the idea that I can continually in my gameplay switch identity really as frequently as I change my mood. And then secondly, is there an opportunity in the future to think about, yes, I own assets, but also what happens when, I borrow Brian's, ape, and I pay him a couple, cents on that each time I use it. Like, is there also a lending opportunity that's part of this? Kelvin?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunities for all those things that you mentioned earlier. So I think fractionalization of NFTs, like say, for example, if you were to have a plot of land within the metaverse, right, and then be able to sort of sublet that land over into, multiple people or tenants, or letting them own a fraction of that. I think that's something that's certainly very interesting. I think really at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is actually be able to aggregate all these experiences together and make them accessible. So essentially, when you're looking at the way that it's built, so what we're doing, I guess maybe from the Gryfyn or Hex Trust perspective, is that we're building the foundational picks and the shovels, right, to allow people to be able to interact with these items. Now, whatever you want to do on top of that, I think that is certainly something that can be built. All you need to do is essentially be able to create the app or a game or an experience which allows you to ingest, and basically, be able to interact and sign transactions on the blockchain, with which allow you to perform these items. So for example, you could have an intermediary smart contract, right, which essentially tracks your ownership of that property, and then that smart contract also acts as a binding agreement between yourself and whoever wishes to sublet or to own part of the property. So I think there's definitely a lot of use cases. And I guess to the first part about how important is it and how integral is the ownership of assets, right, on the blockchain related to the whole metaverse experience, I would say it is, it is the core of it. It is the soul and the blood of the metaverse experience, because essentially what you're trying to do here is to aggregate and essentially prove, go through the experiences that you've gone through, and everybody will be able to see it, right? So essentially the blockchain is something which it's immutable, means that whenever you've gone through an experience, it becomes very, very apparent, it's very obvious that this is something that you have interacted with. So I think you can sort of tie this into the concept of achievements within games as well. So when I'm playing Steam, sometimes I'll play the same game multiple times in order to make sure that I get an achievement, right? That's like a coveted thing that I can show onto my Steam page, right? And everybody will be able to look at how many hours I spent on that game. Just joking, it's really about what I achieve. But really, at the end of the day, right, this is sort of integral, with your experience on the blockchain, and this forms your digital identity. Now, regarding the point of swapping in between different identities, I think that's certainly something that is also possible. So, for example, you could have one identity with one game, and you could have another identity with a different game. Now, where it all comes together, at least within the concept of Gryfyn, where we're seeing it, is that we're unifying all these experiences into one place. Everybody would be able to look at you, or at least what you're willing to share with other people, right? And then you'd be able to prove and show to the world that this is you. This is essentially the things that you've gone through. This is the games, these are the games that you've played with, right? And these are the achievements that you've achieved.
Tommy, on the sort of wallet layer, how do you think about, one, you're trying to protect owners from losing assets, you're also representing the assets they do own, but when you think about how wallets unlock this identity opportunity in metaverses, what do you think is the future of how we see ourselves?
Well, I think this is why, for Gryfyn to exist, I think why we set kind of our mission to protect kind of the security layer of that digital identity is very important. For us, I think the beauty of the Web3 world is that it is the Wild Wild West. You have the capability from now on to define kind of all these things you want to try. Either it's switching identities, the experiences that, or the content that will be designed for this space will allow you to have all of those options. But in the very end, when you spent so much time, so much attention to even just to choose your avatar, all of that, you want it to be protected. And in the past, through gaming, I think that was one of the things that made game economies less serious in a sense, is because ultimately that was within the game. And now why we want Metaverse and the whole existence of Metaverse is that we understand time is respectable. That's one gamer heart, is that my time, it should be respectable. And if I'm going to spend 100 hours grinding, I hope this grind can be representative in some other experience that's related to this gaming world that I'm associated with. So having that security layer for us is very important, and being able to be that facilitator, right? You come back to us for the confidence, but also through kind of our partnership with Animoca Brands, or with other different projects, to be able to then be a safe portal for you to also to test out these new experiences and to enrich your digital identity as well.
So when we were all talking before we started this, it turns out I'm here in America, Benjamin's in Europe, the rest of you guys are in Asia. And I just want to, get a little philosophical, maybe start with you, Brian. Digital identity, each of us are in a different physical location that also has its own social biases. And so, the metaverse feels like a place that we break down a lot of those barriers, because we can be whoever we want in a virtual world. So is there even an opportunity for this idea of identity to be a lot more fluid than it has been in the past? Because we, whether we want to be an ape or a doodle, or we want to just be like gaseous vapor or a 17-foot robot, we can kind of be anything we want based on what's in our wallet. So Brian, just like, is there an aspirational opportunity with the metaverse in terms of that, especially within an open metaverse?
Yeah, I think if you ask me, my personal view would be yes. I think there definitely is. I think it goes back to, at the beginning of this conversation, I talked about how we think about the open metaverse as a collection of digital nations, right? So, and the key principle for, underpinning that is the element of interoperability, right? So let's say, if I like, Decentraland, which is more high fidelity, that can attract a certain type of identity and people to go there, right? But, let's say I don't like it, I can happily move to, Sandbox, right? Which is, again, offers something different in a frictionless manner, right? So I think in a world where we have the open metaverse and true interoperability, I think the answer to your question will be yes. I think there's definitely, room to have that aspirational, more fluid sense of identity in the open metaverse.
Benjamin, anything you want to talk about on kind of identity and opportunity?
What's interesting is when we will look back at the timeline of the metaverse a few years from now, we'll see that kind of started with the digital twins. It started with PFPs, but what are PFPs? People bought PFPs also because they potentially represent a digital twin, their identity through either a visual representation that they like, or because of the community and what it cares. It's the same thing that in the physical world, where everything is a statement. The way you dress is always a statement, whether you care about how you look or whether you don't. Well, even when you don't and you dress, super basic, it's a form of statement. So I think when you pick a PFP, of course there's the speculative aspect, but once you go beyond that and you start engaging with the community, you pick one that you enjoy with. So of course your identity will go through that, and it's interesting that it kind of started with this. It also means that now we need to give a space, a world for these for all of these identities to be able to roam around and socialize. So that I think this is the upcoming step. I know we are going to deliver some really cool stuff specifically for that in 2023.
So going to wrap this section up back with you, Calvin. One of our questions from one of our viewers was talking about that they lost 2 kind of rare NFTs that were on FTX, right? So the idea of us keeping these things on centralized systems, it sounds like, the opportunity really is to figure out who are the trusted partners that can help protect these, right? So, thinking about identity in the metaverse, the last thing you want to do is lose your identity because the exchange you bought it on went down, right? So, Kelvin, what are your thoughts or advice on kind of the easiest way to protect ourselves in this future?
Yeah, sure. So I think there are a couple of ways you could do this, right? So I guess if you were to custody your own assets by yourself, always make sure that your private keys are secure, or at least try to keep your assets in a in a way where you basically need to trust. Really trust the exchange if you really wanted to put your NFTs there. I mean, this applies for any place that you send any of your NFTs to. Now, essentially, when you're thinking about putting your funds or any of your assets onto any of these places, I think you need to have a look at, I guess, the licensing that these guys would have. You would have to look at, I guess, the profiles of the team behind the product, right? Whether they're regulated or not. Essentially, this is within the centralized context, because sometimes, let's face it, some of the best yields out there are available on some of these places, right? So you may not necessarily always be able to get the best yields from the decentralized point of view, but within the centralized exchanges, it's really hard to avoid sometimes, right? So when you really have to do it, always make sure that you go for something that's like a bank grade sort of an institution, right? Or at least are backed by a bank grade institution. So for example, if you could go for an exchange which uses a regulated custodian and basically they hold their funds or there with a proof of of reserves, then this would certainly be very helpful. And essentially do your own due diligence and place your funds in only in places where you've done a little bit of reading up on.
Great. So going to have one more question, then I'm going to have a final question that I'm going to put to all of you guys as well. But so one of the users, I'm going to combine two different user questions that came in. One is about or sort of under sort of the overarching idea of value, right? So I think a lot of, I remember the discussion around Axie, a year ago, when people were saying, well, Axie's not Fortnite, so why are people going to play? And then the conversation was really about, no, the sort of idea of play to earn was such an interesting and new dynamic that it was valuable enough in itself. Plus, especially in communities where people don't make a ton of money, there is such an opportunity to think about that, right? So for this next big wave of users, I think so it's a two-part question. One is it going to be about the gameplay, and that's going to be, are we trying to go against the Assassin's Creeds of the world and all of these other kind of top tier games? Or are we thinking that value and gameplay is also intrinsically tied to reward and the value of being part of that community, right? So sort of where does this next wave of players and users come from, I guess is my question. And why are they here? So maybe Benjamin, you want to start that? Not to put you on the spot, of course.
So I think that my guess is that for 2023, we're still going to focus more on an audience that is very friendly to the space, especially because of what happened. It's going to take some time to recover and to build trust again. And it's a combination of things. Again, as usual, for me, the starting point is, when do we have the Clash of Clans or the League of Legends that basically made people not giving a damn that it was a free-to-play back then, and they just can't because these games were great, and then they started touching a new business model. So when do we have this? Of course, this time I should be able to provide the answer. We're working on it, so it's coming, and we'll have some interesting things, but we still have a long way to go. The second thing is, the whole infrastructure to make it easy, remove the concerns, is also under development, and Gryfyn will be a great milestone to facilitate that. I think that the third thing, and we're kind of going in this direction as well, is when we will start having more of a custodial experience for our users, so that they can basically experience these Web3 games in a Web2 way first, before they get introduced to the benefits of the Web3 component, so that they don't have to start to worry and to go through this process. So I think for 2023, we stay with our an audience that is pretty friendly, and of course we keep educating a bit more and more, and so it will increase progressively, but I don't see like a massive adoption happening. I think we'll have to wait for 2024 for that.
Brian?
Yeah, no, I think I agree with what Benjamin said, right? I think for next year, it would still be, the focus would be on kind of the crypto friendly and the crypto savvy. I think what we will start to see is less of an emphasis on play to earn, right? So now you hear, new terms like play and earn, engage and earn. And I think that's where we start focusing a little bit more on making, games that are sustainable, and abstracting away, some of the blockchain elements of it, right? So that's going back to the user experience and the user journey discussion that we had earlier.
All right, so I'm going to give you guys one final sort of thesis, and then I want to hear each of your opinion on it. So Matthew Ball, who writes a lot about the metaverse, recently wrote that we are entering, in his opinion, the kind of fourth big era of computing. He said that, if you look at how computing has gone over the last 70 years, we started with mainframes, in the 50s to the 70s. Then we got to the personal computing movement, which was started around 1980. Then you have social and mobile and the cloud that all became in the early 2000s. And his premise is the metaverse is the next great computing era. And I want to get all of your thoughts. We'll start with Tommy on, is the metaverse the next big technology? Or, as we see so much interest happening right now, for example, in AI, are there other ones that are going to come and say, actually, no, this is the big thing? What are your thoughts on the metaverse being the next big computing era?
Well, I think right now, if I were to say, it's actually a change of how human beings might want to quantify change. Because for me, metaverse actually breaks out of a format of change. It's actually kind of a synthesis of all the changes that's happening simultaneously at the same time. And especially you can see that like a big thing is technology. Like the technology growth is so wide, and we don't know the next VR goggles that could actually jump that as well. So having that platform for all of the kind of, it's almost like a space now. It's no longer like, oh, this is going to be the next thing, because you'll have more additions of metaverses that are come out. There's going to be layers that are going to be built on top that make metaverses. So we don't know where it's going. So that's why I'm excited. It's like it's not tangible anymore. It could happen the metaverse could happen in so many ways. And so that's why for me, that's where it's very interesting to see it as a truly as a space now.
Kelvin, what are your thoughts on, is the metaverse the next big era in computing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be one of the main forefronts in terms of computing. But I guess taking a step back, I mean, when you look at the various developments in computing, right? You've got machine learning and AI. You've got they call it big data or data science, right? You've got one step back, you've got Web 2.0, right? And then you've got the .com era, and I guess essentially these things, even though it might seem like they come in sequence, actually they are additive to one another. I mean, that's my view. I mean, like essentially you can't have one without the other. And I guess now we've sort of gone to a point of, divergence where you've got so many different fronts in terms of computing that it's really, really hard to say that, one is the only forefront that we have. I mean, who's not to say that, that machine learning might not actually be converging with the metaverse, right? It could be that you're actually seeing intertwining of all these different forefronts together. So I'm just going to leave it as that. Like I would say that it's really a whole combination of things and not just this.
Brian, so your thoughts on that, and maybe just adding to what being additive to what Kelvin was saying, as you look at these metaverses and queuing you up as well for this, Benjamin, it feels like AI, machine learning, big data all actually help make this richer experiences in the future. So Brian, what are your thoughts on metaverse as a new computing era?
Yeah, I think my answer to that would be pretty simple, right? I think going back to what I was discussing earlier, I think to me, the metaverse is really kind of a experience rather than a destination, right? So I don't necessarily think of it as like a computing era per se, but more of a combination of the different leading technologies, right? From AI, AR, VR, cloud and whatnot, right? I think what's interesting is we are increasingly seeing applications of AI into the blockchain. So, there's a model within the Animoca Brands ecosystem called ASM. And what they do is they bring AI into kind of the NFTs, right? And by that, what that means is, you have the physical manifestation of the NFT, but what they do is they would also train through machine learning the personality and the attributes of what this NFT would look like in the games. And then they would create these games and have these NFTs play against each other, right? As if they were kind of digital personalities, right? So you are starting to see in the industry, though in its early stages, people are starting to experiment with new technologies and applying that to, the metaverses and the blockchain.
Benjamin, what are your thoughts?
I think we're going to start seeing many. There are many important things that are going on right now, but I think they're kind of converging towards the metaverse. So, what the metaverse will bring or will require is this need to first empower content creator, because we can't rely on developers being on a content treadmill. We've already seen that with MMOs, and that's the reason why. If you look at how we've been developing, we started from these simple games, then we added 3D, then the online, and then the network component, and then we entered this MMO space. And for some reason, we stopped. We stopped developing MMOs, and we went to free-to-play web-based game, mobile game that were easier product services to build. Mostly because it was a daunting task building an MMO. I can tell when I started pitching VCs back in 2017, everybody was running away from us for that reason. And rightfully so, because it's a daunting task again. So now we have this need for the metaverse is we need to empower content creators. We need to streamline our production processes to be and improve our technology so that we can do that. We also need to improve the technology so that we can deliver these experiences. The point is that it can run here on mobile, in a browser. So I think it's just going to boost so many satellite industries, pixel streaming, of course, generative AI, no code, technologies, so that we can start populating this world with really rich, meaningful experiences. Because it's not just going to be the developers contributing to that. It's going to be how we collectively build this type of new destinations. So rather than being another internet, I think we're just expanding the world. We're expanding the physical world with these new destinations.
All right. Well, on the concept of expanding the world, we're going to wrap it up. So one, I just want to give a thank you to Benjamin Charbet from Darewise, Brian Chan from Animoca Brands, Kelvin Singh from Hex Trust, and Tommy Wong from Gryfyn. And I do want to give us another special shout out to hextrust.com for bringing this conversation to us. Fascinating, enlightening, really sort of amazing conversation that really has got me and hopefully all of the viewers thinking a lot more about what the metaverse will be, but also how there's still so much to plan for, right? Like it's not going to be, I think, the way any of us assume it's going to be. It's going to be really the way it goes based on what happens in the next year or two. So again, thank you to Hex Trust. Thank you to all of our speakers and everyone in the audience who watched. Really appreciate you spending some time with us. And I think with that, we'll wrap it up. Thanks, guys.